Let's talk about all the tools we're going to need for the New Star Beginner Quilt course. So I have everything that you're going to need laid out here, and this is a good base to start in quilting. We have rulers and scissors, rotary cutters. I'm going to go through everything individually. I have a friend, her name is also Kristen, and she has a craft shop. She's going to do kits for this stuff. Or you can look for these items individually if you have some and maybe don't need everything. But we're going to walk through step by step and see what we need. And then I'm going to talk about some bonus things that you could also use at the end. And I will talk about what is really essential to have and what are kind of extra things that you could wait on and potentially buy at different times in the future as you get more and more into quilting. So these are all tools that I personally use and love. And we're going to start with the cutting mat here. This cutting mat is by Fiskars. It is 24 inches by 36 inches, and I really wouldn't recommend a cutting mat smaller than that because you need one large enough to hold a fat quarter size piece of fabric or a half a yard piece of fabric folded in half. Now, something to look for in cutting mats if you don't buy this one is to get a self-healing cutting mat. That means when you cut across the mat with your rotary cutter, sometimes it can make a little ditch where the blade of the rotary cutter cuts. A self-healing mat means it will close up that ditch. So as you're cutting future cuts, you won't hit that ditch and it won't make like a little notch in your fabric. It'll self-heal so all of your cuts are smooth at all times. I really love this one. I have two of them and I put them side by side and it gives me a nice big usable surface. This is something you can easily store by sliding behind a large piece of furniture or under your sofa as well. So I would recommend this. This is one thing that my friend Kristen does not have in her kits. And you can find it at local craft stores, big box stores. You can probably find it on Amazon, but finding it at a source where the shipping is a little bit cheaper or it's local. My friend Kristen has kits for a lot of the items I am recommending, but the cutting boards are not going to be part of those kits. Okay, next let's talk about the rotary cutter. So this is an Olfa rotary cutter. This is an ergonomic rotary cutter, which just means it has a little bit different shape than a standard rotary cutter. It's also a 45 millimeter blade. So that is really good to know when you're buying replacement blades because you do have to replace those so they stay sharp and cut nicely over time. Now, I really love the ergonomic because it has the little push handle and the shape of it is very nice. So it just feels better in my hand when I'm cutting back and forth. Now it also has locking buttons so you can lock the blade in or out. And I typically would lock it in when I'm not using it. There's not often a case I feel you should lock the blade out because when you squeeze the handle, it pushes the blade out. And when you let go of the handle, it pulls the blade in. And when you're not using it, you always want that blade to be in. But I have used a lot of different rotary cutters, and this is the one that I found to be the best. Okay, so we need rulers to cut with. So I recommend this large ruler as your main ruler that you're working with your rotary cutter. Your rotary cutter is going to glide along the edge of your rulers, and so it's important that you have a ruler that's wide enough to fit on fabric. And so what I mean by that is when you're taking a piece of fabric that is about half the width of a fabric, we talked about width of fabric in our fabric requirement videos coming up in week 1, but this is a half yard of fabric. It's folded in half, selvage to selvage, and this is typically how we cut a longer piece of fabric. So we want our long ruler to be able to reach across the whole width of that piece of fabric. Typically we do not unfold our fabric and cut it selvage to selvage, which is roughly 40 to 42 inches because we just can't get a ruler or a cutting mat long enough and it makes our cuts uneasy. So the 6.5 by 24-inch OmniGrid ruler is a really great ruler to start with. And I would recommend this as your number 1 ruler purchase. I really love that it has the 1/2 inch on one side, so it's 6.5 inches wide. And a lot of what I cut is going to be at 1/2 inch increments, and that helps me get a really nice, precise cut. Some rulers you find that are going to be 6 inches by 24 inches and they don't have that extra 1/2 inch. That's up to you if you like that or not. Now, this is a 3-inch by 18-inch, and this is a great mid-size ruler. It's nice and long to work with, but it's not so wide, so it's a little bit easier to maneuver than the 6.5 by 24-inch ruler. So next we're going to go to a 6 by 12-inch ruler, which is a really great small size ruler. There's not a lot of times when you're cutting pieces out of fabric that are bigger than 12 inches. So this is a really easy ruler to maneuver. And after you cut long strips out of your long 24-inch ruler, we would maybe switch over to the 6 by 12-inch ruler to cut smaller pieces. Now we have a 6.5-inch square ruler. And that is a really great ruler because getting rulers that are the size square you're cutting, and this is a 3.5 inch that I just picked up, but getting rulers in a square size that you cut a lot is really helpful. And you'll see that as we work with the New Star Beginner Quilt pattern, that we're cutting 3.5 inches or 4.5 inches a lot, and having a square is really helpful with those. So those might be purchases you maybe work on getting later and don't start out with, but they're really great handy ruler sizes to have if you want to invest in those now. But I would say the most important ruler are the 6.5-inch by 24-inch and the 6 by 12-inch. I have these 2 small rulers as well. It actually comes in a pack of 3. There is a shorter one. We have a 1/2 inch wide by 12-inch is the long, and a 1/2 inch wide by 6-inch, and then I have a 1/2 inch by 3-inch. I apologize, I could not find that one, but it does come in the pack. They're also from OmniGrid. All the rulers are from OmniGrid. And they're really great when marking things, which we do for our stitch and flip method, for HST method. We're going to be making markings on the back of fabric, and I love these for that. Now, I just want to touch on the fact that all the rulers I'm suggesting are the same brand. They're OmniGrid brand. This post is in no way sponsored, but I do recommend buying your rulers all from the same brand. There are going to be some specialty rulers that are going to be outside brands, but the rulers you cut most with, all being from the same brand, are going to be really great to work together with to make sure that all your cuts are the same size. Now I'm showing you this section of 3, the 6.5-inch by 24, the 6 by 12, and the 2 marking rulers. And that's what I would really recommend starting with if you are on a limited budget and don't want to buy lots of tools. So these are the shears I would recommend. We don't cut fabric with our cutting scissors too often, but we do use them quite a bit. These are Kai brand, Kai, 8-inch shears. And I love Kai brand. The ones that I've used and had for a solid 5 years have never dulled and have been amazing. I've had many other scissors, Fiskars, Ginger, Singer brand, and they all tend to dull over time, and you do have to sharpen them. So I really love this Kai brand and would highly recommend it. Okay, let's move into some of our smaller notions like a seam ripper. We're going to need a seam ripper. It's not an option, so just make sure you get one that is easy to hold and is sharp. You'll probably have to replace these over time because they do dull. This is a great one. It has a little bit bigger handle. And the one in the kit from Kristen's Craft Room is very similar to this. A cap is great so that you don't poke yourself when you're not using it. We have a pin cushion. Any pin cushion will do. This is just a standard tomato pin cushion. You can also find lots of tutorials to make your own pin cushion. The standard tomato pin cushion has this little strawberry that also has something in it that when you put your needles back and forth in that strawberry, it helps sharpen the tip of your needles. I love these John James needles for hand stitching, which we will do for binding. These are quilting needles, and I've tried a bunch of different brands. This is what I've landed on and love. So thread is important to sew with. This is an RFL 50 weight thread, and it is what I piece all of my seams with. There are different weights of thread, and I would say your standard is a 30 to 40 weight for a cotton thread for piecing. And piecing is the seams that you sew together for a quilt. You're going to use different thickness of thread potentially for quilting, or if you're hand quilting as well, that's definitely a different thickness of thread. There are a lot of brands of thread out there, and what I would say is 100% cotton is very important. How it's rolled on the spool, I just learned this recently, helps determine if it needs to be standing vertically or going on its side, and that's something to learn about. And the thickness with RFL, like I said, you have variation in thickness. A higher number is a thinner thread, and a thinner thread is really important for piecing, so it takes up less space in your seam. A thicker thread will take up more space, so when you open your fabric up and it folds over your seam, it is a thicker area. So a 50 weight RFL is really great. Now, test it with your machine. My Genomes I found like RFL, but some people have said that it's very linty for them. So you can try some other brands of thread as well. I would recommend it because even though it's a higher price than, say, Coats and Clark from a big box store, it ends up being very similar in cost just based on how many yards you get. But I just like the weight of it and the quality of it more than a big box store brand like Coats and Clark. Typically, you are going to have to buy this brand or any other specialty brands at a quilt shop or online at a specialty store or a quilt shop. You're not going to easily find them in a big box sewing store that you can go to locally. So the machine is back here too, but I have a whole other video about the machine and its accessories. So they're just here so you can see them, but we're going to talk about them in another video. I want to talk about some extra stuff that you will need or may not need but could buy. So I'm just going to move some stuff out of the way and grab my iron. You definitely need an iron and of course an ironing board. I have an Olysio which I bought. It is very expensive, not a beginner friendly iron cost wise, but it is a really great machine. I have sewn over the past 5 to 10 years with very inexpensive irons from Target, Walmart, wherever, and they work fine. I recently treated myself to the Olysio brand and I have really enjoyed it. It is a little bit more robotic. So if you do want to dive into fancy irons, I would recommend checking out Olysio, but also know that a standard iron from Black & Decker, Shark, those all have worked great for me in the past as well. So one of the large things that I really love to recommend to people is a stripology ruler, and you'll see me talk about it again in cutting, which is week 2. And it's amazing. It is very expensive, and if you're not going to be quilting a ton, I don't know that it's worth the cost. But basically, it's a large ruler that you can put on top of strips of fabric, and it has grooves every ½ inch, and you can cut in like 2-inch increments, ½ inch increments, 1-inch increments, and cut a bunch with one laying down of the ruler instead of moving a small ruler a bunch of times. I'll talk and demonstrate about it in the cutting week 2, but it is a really great ruler. So we have some other tools here. This is a spinning cutting board. So mine is a little bowed so it doesn't stay really great. But basically the top part spins so you can put something on it, align your ruler, cut sides of your piece, and then turn it to the other 2 sides so you don't have to kind of contort your body to cut your piece of fabric. It's mostly for trimming, and I will probably use it in the videos of the stitch and flip demonstration. For that trimming, it will be really worth it. But something to think about down the line, not necessarily a perfect thing for you to buy right now, just a fun extra. We have some seam rollers. Those are really great. Really good for FPP, foundation paper piecing, but also can help if you don't have an iron really handy that you can flatten your seams out. It basically is a wooden roller on the end of a handle, and you can roll it and put pressure on to flatten seams better for you. Okay, next we have a tiny pair of scissors. These are cute little swan scissors. You want to have some small pair of scissors near your sewing machine to snip threads and for other little jobs. As long as they're sharp and I think kind of pointy, any pair will do. Kai has a really great brand, but having a small pair of scissors is really handy. I actually like to have multiple large pairs of scissors too, so I can put scissors by my sewing machine, scissors by my cutting board, and wherever in my sewing space that I need them. So having a few extra pairs of scissors is always great. A Hera marker is really great for marking. It is almost like a letter opener. It's plastic and it has a curved edge that you run along fabric to mark a line, usually along the edge of a ruler. It's really great for marking quilting lines and will come in handy down when we do quilting of our New Star quilt if we're doing straight lines. But sometimes you can use it for marking a stitch and flip as well, which comes to these other tools, which are marking pencils and marking markers. And those are great for marking lines, which we do in the New Star quilt pattern. We mark the back of squares with a diagonal line so we can sew directly on top of that diagonal line or a 1/4 inch away from it. Now, I personally just use a mechanical pencil, but you might want to use a marking tool like a marker or a pencil that can be erased with water or heat. A mechanical pencil, the marking stays on your fabric. So these are kind of all the tools that I am recommending that you get. Kristen's Craft Room, which I have linked in the description, and I'm going to link the blog post where I link all these different items. And Kristen's Craft Room, she has made kits for us with the most important tools that you really need for quilting, and then also a larger kit with all of these extra things that you could maybe do without. She also has everything listed individually, and so you can buy if you just need a couple things if you already have a lot of tools. I want to reiterate that I definitely recommend using the same size, the same brand of ruler throughout all your main rulers to cut pieces. Now there are a couple situations like the Stripology ruler. That little square that you see above the cutting mat here is a block lock ruler that cuts HSTs with a special groove. And those are different brands, but in general, all of your cutting rulers would be great to have be the same size or the same brand. I keep saying same size so that all the lines are exactly identical. You would think that rulers would be identical in size, but I've seen some variations. The difference I'm showing you here is Omni Grid brand, which is what all these brand of rulers are, has Omni Grip, which is the back of it when it's Omni Grip is not super shiny and smooth. It has a little bit of like just a textured feel, so it grips the fabric a little bit more, where if it doesn't have that, it's just a shiny, smooth surface and can tend to shift around a little bit more. So something to look at because you do have to have your ruler grip the fabric as you're laying it on top so that when you're pushing against it with the rotary cutter, it doesn't move. You're going to be putting pressure on it, and that grip just helps a little bit to hold the fabric. So these are all the tools I really recommend. I am showing you one of my big rulers. It's not OmniGrid, just to show the difference. I apologize because this video, when I originally recorded it, I did all the talking and I did not have a fully charged mic, so I am voicing over everything. So things might not completely line up from how my hands are playing to what the words say. But in general, this is all of the supplies that you need for quilting with a few extras at the end. And these are all supplies that I use and love. I did buy a lot of new things for this course, but They are identical to ones that I already have and have used for years. I'm swapping out some ones because some of my rulers have broken over time. The corners tend to break. Again, I've had mine for 6+ years, so it's lasted a really long time. And like I said at the beginning, I highly recommend buying the quality items unless this is maybe a one-off thing for you. If you're making one quilt and are going to be done, maybe don't invest in super nice stuff and check with family and friends and see if you can borrow, or go that route and then invest in these slowly over time to have really great supplies for yourself. The supplies will really help you have a great experience with quilting. When your supplies and tools don't work properly, it's not as much fun to quilt, in my opinion.